Quick show of hands, everybody. If you were at Wings and Things on Friday, I'm just interested to see. Yeah, I believe it because a quick story about Wings and Things while we transition here is, so quick peek behind, a little inside baseball. This is going to shock you, but you guys sometimes don't sign up for stuff. And so we were like, oh, I wonder what's really going to happen. I wonder if, how many people are going to come. We're coming out of a couple of weird years as far as, obviously, life, but also events here at Hope. And so about 24 hours before, we had about 250 people registered. And we're like, that's a lot more than other years. And Ashley looks at me and she said, do you think there are going to be a lot of people here? And I said, there are two choices, or there's two things that are happening. Either one, all of Men of Hope decided simultaneously that they're going to learn and value registration, or there are going to be a lot of people there. And it was exactly number two. It was the latter. We packed this entire room out. We had to set up some tables outside of this room. It was a really great time. Perry and other folks led some really fantastic breakouts, and Jim Sonnefeld was an absolute champ, a really cool guy. He was a rock star that didn't know how cool he was. So that's kind of his personality. He was just like everybody else, but man, it was cool to hear from him. So a great time was had by all. So good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Kimpston. I am the men's minister here at Lutheran Church of Hope, and a special welcome to anybody giving this a go after trying out Wings and Things and saying, yeah, these guys don't seem that weird. So we tricked you and are grateful that you're here. This past week, Terry introduced us to a new series, to this new book. It's Coach Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And I said it in a letter, I said it in announcements a couple weeks ago. If you hear the name Pyramid of Success, you're like, it's either a pyramid scheme or it's some self-help book about like how to be successful at business or whatever. But really, it is neither of those things. Instead, it's the winningest basketball coach in history sharing some thoughts about how he led his life. And I love basketball. My wife and I have season tickets to the Drake games. We're both alumni. Go Bulldogs. And it's important for me to tell you, even though I love good basketball, that the reason you should read this has nothing to do with John Wooden's winning record. Because we all know, and we've all experienced in our lives, in all different areas, there are plenty of different types of folks. There's plenty of different people with different backgrounds that spend their days doing a number of different things that win in life. Success does not equate to righteousness. So whether it's business, sports, or any other area of life, instead, the reason you should heed these words involved with Coach Wooden's legacy is the man that he was to those around him. He was able to speak into the lives of these young men who came to excel at basketball. That's what they thought that they were there for. But by the time they left as a student, they certainly had won a lot of basketball games. They excelled at basketball, but Coach Wooden helped them excel at life. And Coach Wooden's pyramid that's in his book, and you can actually get it at the bookstore while you're here at worship. We stocked some copies back there in case you don't want to wait for Amazon to do that, but you can find that there. And it has a lot of different ideas, or what he calls building blocks, these different ideas that make up this pyramid. And Terry touched on a few of these that are foundational to the rest of the pyramid model, and we're continuing with some of those this morning. And the first one that we're talking about is cooperation. Now, Coach defines this as the benefit of working for all. He says that there are a lot of people that selflessly work for others, and that can be totally holy and good, but we shouldn't be confused that when we're talking about cooperation, the core identity of cooperation is to work towards the benefit of all involved. Not just self-sacrificially, but for all involved. It's a true team. To quote Coach Wooden, some individuals, such as writers and scientists, often work alone and accomplish much. But in my opinion, those who primarily work alone will never become all they can become if they're working with others. Working with others makes us much more than we could ever become alone. Now, please note what he doesn't say. Sometimes when we talk about teamwork, we're like, you're nothing by yourself. You only can survive with a team. Note what Coach is saying is that it's not that you can't do great things by yourself. A lot of times you might have that argument. You're like, I'm doing fine flying solo. We throw a lot of phrases around, especially culturally. We're conditioned to value this as men, and there are all of these different names that we give it that glorify going it solo. We talk about being lone rangers. I hear other guys being like, I'm more of a solo artist as opposed to somebody in a band. I'm not a pack animal. There are a ton of ways that we romanticize this flying solo, but what Coach Wooden is saying is that regardless of how great you can be on your own, and I don't know if you know this, but I've gotten to know some of you. If you look around this room, there's a lot of greatness by a lot of different standards. There are people that have accomplished a lot in business, in their life, and that make a big difference in our community. That you guys are very successful in a lot of sense. But, and I mean this, and I would take the time to look everybody in the eye if it wouldn't take too long, to tell you, yes, you, will never be as good as you can be if you decide to go on your own strength. If you just decide to go it alone. And you're like, wait a second, I know the whole strength thing, I'm thinking of the quote, yeah, we're supposed to go on God's strength, Chris. What does this have to do with cooperation with anybody else? What does that have to do with being on a team? Hear me when I say this. Cooperation, God often uses us as the actions and blessing in this world. God often uses us as the action and blessings in this world. A lot of people pray and expect everything to change for them overnight, as though God snaps God's fingers and all of a sudden it magically changes without requiring us to do anything in the meantime. A lot of the world's criticisms about the church, about Christianity, about faith has to do with this faulty expectation. They say, wait a second, you believe in some magical force that's just going to magically poof away the world's problems? And my response to that is, no, I believe in the creator of the universe that's going to transform me so that I can help be part of what addresses the problem. I can be part of the ways that God blesses the world. Said another way, a lot of guys, and maybe you're one of them, feel like you're praying for God to fix something. You're like, I need this to be different in my life. They say at Men at Hope and Wednesday mornings that I want the world to be different. And we say that prayer is powerful, so I'm going to try this whole prayer thing. And you pray for God to fix something, but just because your expectation is that God will act requiring nothing of you, you say, oh man, I prayed for everything to just kind of get fixed, and it didn't just kind of get fixed. God, where are you? God, you are absent. When in actuality, God is trying to answer the prayer that you have in the form of other people in your life. You prayed to not feel so alone all the time, but you expected God to just simply take away those feelings instead of looking at investing in the relationships of the people that God put in your life. You're at a stalemate with God. You prayed that you would know what to do because you feel lost, but you expected to magically just have all the knowledge to get you through the situation instead of having the people walk alongside you that have maybe experienced the things that you have in your life, that might know what you're going through. The list goes on, but so far we've talked only what you can get out of this, of cooperation, to address your own problems, but it also works the other way too. In life, maybe it's going great for you. You're like, Chris, I don't really need anybody. Things are going pretty good for me. I'm here on a Wednesday morning. What more do you need from me? But God might be looking for you to be the answer to somebody else's prayer. Somebody might be saying to me, like, I'm like, God, what are you doing? And God's like, no, I sent Terry. Like, I sent Perry. I sent these different people, and they are the answer to the prayer, not just some sort of magic solution. And oftentimes it's both of it at the same time. If you've been around here a while, you know that you can pour into somebody else and it's really meaningful, and you can share a testimony, or you can be with somebody and speak into their lives and just be that person, be that brother in their lives, and then also somebody else is pouring into you. It's usually both at the same time. We are certainly better together, and that is what cooperation means. We are all using the blessings that we're given, the skills and talents that we have, the ways in which we've been wired, so that we can play the role in the world around us of who God made us to be. Like Romans chapter 12 says, we're all a part of one body, working together to make it all happen. So the question is, what role are you playing? What action, what part of the body, so to speak, are you being called to follow? And make no mistake, it's not just to put on a mask and be some faceless person. It's to use the skills and talents that God blessed you with. So that's something to wonder about as we know that we're better together and talk about cooperation. Now, the next building block that Wooden talks about is loyalty. And the baggage with loyalty is that a lot of people might think that loyalty is sometimes defined as blind allegiance for no other reason than it's mandatory, right? I've heard in businesses before that have like sketchy practices, and then when people leave that business, people are like, well, there's just no loyalty anymore, right? Or when a partner in a relationship, and I mean that in a business sense, in a romantic sense, in a friendship sense, when somebody just kind of doesn't show up, doesn't bring their best self to the relationship, and invest in it, then when the other person leaves, the person being left, who's not done a great job the entire time, goes, man, where's the loyalty? But what Coach Wooden is talking about is something very different. Instead, where our modern context, we might define loyalty as an obligation between two people or parties, what Wooden is talking about instead is our relationship with our own set of core values. In other words, are you willing to be loyal to who you truly are? Are you willing to be loyal to who you were made to be? To quote Coach here, loyalty is the foundational quality that gets us through hard times. Will we compromise our integrity when temptation is great, or will we remain loyal to our beliefs and core values? And one of the reasons that we are allowed to get this one wrong without us even noticing sometimes is because we forget who we actually are. We forget those values that we hold at our center. What happens is we reorient who we are around everyone else's expectations, and we forget who God made us to be. So even when we're experiencing success and everything's going really well, and all of these different elements that if you orient yourself around worldly success, maybe you're getting it, you have money, maybe you have the house that you wanted, you moved into the place, and maybe you're here this morning thinking, yeah, it must be nice. But then people are still empty. You hear it everywhere. Jim Sonnefeld talked about it this morning. Called him. No, when back at Wings and Things, he talked about having everything, and still he found himself picking himself off the floor in the in his studio detached from his house, with his daughter asking him, "Dad, what are you doing?" And that's a moment that changed his life. He had everything. Because the struggles that we feel, even when we find success oriented around something in the world, it actually has to do with loyalty, that struggle does. Because unbeknownst to us, we're being disloyal to the person that we were made to be. 2 Samuel 11 records a great moral failure in the story of King David, one of the most popular kings in the history of God's people, which 2 Samuel 11 is the whole ordeal with Bathsheba, right? But I bring this up not because of David's unfaithfulness, but because of Bathsheba, her husband named Uriah. I'm bringing it up because of his faithfulness. For those not familiar with the story, basically, here's the very quick version. David sees a beautiful woman. It's like, she's going to be my wife. And everybody's like, she's already married. So her husband's off for war, fighting for David, by the way. But he sleeps with her, lots of questions about consent, and she becomes pregnant. So, in order to cover this up, David brings her husband back from war and is like, man, would be really great to see your wife right now, if you know what I mean, right? Like, I'm doing you a favor. You're king, my buddy, my friend. But here's why I tell this story. David goes to check on Uriah. Uriah doesn't go back to his house. And David's like, my guy, I'm trying to do you a solid. Why are you not going home to your wife? Now, for David, he's just trying to cover up his everything, all his mistakes that he's made. Uriah's response is the ark, a.k.a. the representative of God in the world. That's what represented God to them physically at the time, what God gave them to represent. Uriah said, the ark and God's people, Judah, are staying in tents. My commander Joab and the Lord's men are camped in open country, meaning they are completely exposed to the enemy. How could I go back to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, my king, I will not do such a thing. I'm not saying, please hear me, I am not saying don't go and hang with your spouse. Don't go back home. That's not the point of this. What I am saying is, narratively, what's happening in this story is David is doing everything that he can to cover his own wrongdoing. He is firmly lost in his own brokenness. And Uriah answers him by basically saying, here are the things that are most important to me, so that's going to guide the way that I lead my life. And we can endeavor to live into that example as well. So what does that look like? How do you actually live out those values? How do your values actually show up in your life? Do they? We all have lots of things that we say is important, but how does it actually manifest in your life? And that leads to our third building block, and that is self-control. And you might think, all right, here it is, the no fun rule. But Wooden uses emotion in golf as an example. He says if you have too much emotion in a golf swing, you're going to slice. Too much emotion in golf for me is not throwing the club in the water after I do indeed slice. But Coach goes on to explain, and he's talking about more than just golf. He's talking about life. Coach says, if our emotions take over, we're not going to execute near our personal level of competency because both judgment and common sense will be impaired. Wooden applies this to parenting. He talks about the leading of teams. He talks about dealing with conflict, all areas that are much more than the no fun rule, much more than how much you have to drink or specific choices on a night out that you might make. To him, it's all about what happens. Self-control is all about what happens when things don't go your way. Get this. He describes losing a state title his senior year of high school, right? And they lose. The other team hits a half-court shot, underhanded lob to just win the game. That is unfair, right? A team as disciplined as I'm sure Wooden's was at the time, somebody who's given it all, and he as a high school student describes, he was one of the only people not crying walking out the court. A high school student, right? Like somebody really in charge of their emotions. And he's not talking about this because he's pushing some sort of rhetoric about toughness or any of those types of things. While he felt badly, he said that he knew he didn't have a reason to hang his head. He said he simply didn't need to cry because he was at peace with himself. He saw the bigger picture. Similar to losing perspective of your core values when we were talking about loyalty, Coach is stating that seeing the grander role that you're playing and the God that is at the helm allows you to recontextualize what's happening in your life. Of course it feels bad when something bad happens. But when that thing is the most important to you and it goes south, you're bound to lose control of your emotions. And the brokenness of the world and in each one of us is unrelentingly imperfect, right? So you're going to spend a lot of time losing your mind as everything that is not God continues to be just as flawed as it's ever been. If that's where you're going to build your foundation on, you're going to continue to get disappointed. You're going to continue to lose your mind and hurt yourself and those around you. Losing control of your emotions is an indicator that perhaps you lack the proper perspective. When we lose control of our emotions, it's because we've allowed something else to become our primary concern. And that thing doesn't reflect the truth of God's love for you. I'm not saying to not feel your emotions. I'm not saying you can't be upset. But when you lose it, and oftentimes, maybe if you've lost it in the past, it's about something that's like not even that important. And you have to like step back and you're like, wait, why did that really set me off? As Mike said, I think it was this last weekend, it's because something else is, or 2 weekends ago, it's maybe because something else has become your God. In 2 Peter 5, the author tracks this same process. The author of 2 Peter 5 says, knowing God leads to self-control. Self-control leads to patient endurance. And patient endurance leads to godliness. In other words, maybe we can't quite find our way because we're missing the whole first part of knowing where God is in our lives, what role God is playing. So with cooperation and loyalty and self-control, we could boil down some of these themes here to seeing ourselves as a part of God's body. We could talk about the answers, that we indeed are the answers to blessings, and knowing yourself and your core values, living those values, and remembering that God is at the core of all of it to ground us in the way that we live in the world. And this isn't easy stuff, but it is definitely always worth it. So for those of us, we had a full morning this morning, so I know I'm getting you out a few minutes late. But as we go to your groups, here are my questions for us here this morning. Where have you been better with a team? This could be anything in life. You could go deep, you can not go deep, it's fine. But where in your life have you been better with a team? Which current struggle might be better if you had someone alongside you? AKA, where do you need some help? I'm not saying you're asking the guys in your group. You're just talking. Contextually, man, this would be a lot easier if I wasn't alone in this. That's our first one there, with cooperation. Second one, with loyalty, what is a core value to you? Where does that show up in your everyday life? I'm talking about practical values. Where did the things that you hang your hat on, how does that show up in your life? How do you live that value? And last one, for self-control, who do you know that has a lot of self-control? Who's somebody that's just like, man, they don't have to have a Zen personality. Maybe they look like they drank too much coffee like I do all the time. But you see somebody and you're like, man, that person, I think of some people I've looked up to throughout my life in the church. For some reason, they just seem to have it together. And I don't mean all their affairs in order in life or any of that. I'm saying they seem to have a peace and things don't seem to rattle them because there's something else about them. Who do you know that's like that? And what seems to allow them that level of discipline? It could be a number of different things. You don't have to say it's Jesus, like the church answer. But what is it? What allows them to have that peace? Feel free to be generous with your stories with other people. Feel free to be generous with yourselves. It's good to know and be known. I'm certainly grateful for the honor to get to speak to you all this morning and to be the person running around here wondering what we should do next. It's a blessing and an honor. Grace and peace, friends. Go be good to each other. We'll see you in a little bit.